Hello, everyone, and welcome to D Life. I'm Michelle, a sports nutritionist and a nutritionist on the panel of D Life. If cholesterol and lipids are close to your heart, then this podcast is what you must watch. As the year begins, and as we all are so concerned about cholesterol, I think it's a topic everyone actually knows everything about. But if you really feel you need to know anything more, then this podcast is what you must watch. I am so honored to have with us Ivor Cummins, who is also known as the Fat Emperor. It's a long story. Maybe he'll give us a little bit about why he's known as the Fat Emperor. He is an engineer and he has been researching cholesterol, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic disease for over 7 years. He is a co author of the book Eat Rich, Live Long. He has a YouTube channel. So if you're data driven and are inclined towards data, and if you have a little bit of tech in you, then his YouTube channel has all the data driven videos, all you need to know about cholesterol and everything in between, maybe. So that's something that you need to watch. And let's begin by welcoming Ivor. Welcome, Ivor, to D Life podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here. Privileged.
Ivor, I think there was a screen freeze. Thank you so much, and it's really nice to have you for the first time addressing audience in India. And can we begin by trying to know a little bit about what got you into the research of cardiovascular disease?
Right, Michelle. Well, I around 7 years ago got some poor blood tests in routine blood tests with the doctor. And my background briefly, I'm a biochemical engineer and I've spent over 25 years in leading complex problem solving teams in an industry. So I spent a quarter century leading complex problem solving. I'm pretty hot at research and resolving root causes. But anyway, 7 years ago, I got some poor blood test results, high cholesterol, and I had high liver enzyme and high iron loading, a thing called ferritin. So the readings were really high. I kind of looked over the doctor's desk and looked at the numbers because, like many Indians, I'm data driven. And I realized, wow, I'm way outside the normal range. It's not just a little high, it's really high. So the doctor wasn't too concerned. And when I questioned the doctor pretty aggressively, to be honest, I asked the two main questions when taking over a new problem. And the questions are, A, what are the impacts of these numbers in terms of sickness or mortality? And B, what are the root causes in my environment or lifestyle that would drive these up so I can start fixing them? And I got very weak answers. So I went to another doctor, a more senior person, and I got a similar result. And now I was getting a little bit shocked because these were standard blood tests. And how did these people not know their craft? So I went to a third person, extremely senior, very high level. And I got a little more, but still very weak. So I realized then something huge. And it was that the doctors do not really fully understand the implications of some of their basic measurements, which stunned me. And I knew then that I could go and research them properly, if you will,
on your
and
own?
find out the answers.
Yeah. So you decided to do it on your own.
Basically, yeah, I went to ResearchGate and PubMed. I had corporate logons and I researched ferritin and GGT, the liver enzyme, and cholesterol. And I began to research all the biochemical pathways, what influenced them, and all the human studies around them. And within 4 to 5 weeks, I had my essential first answer that my cholesterol was not really so important, that the other two measures were really, really important with huge risk for disease when you're high. And I also had the beginnings of realizing it was carbohydrate metabolism that was driving up my figures. So a short while after that, I switched to a low carb diet. That was my single intervention. And my cholesterol numbers got great within 8 weeks. My GGT and ferritin, the two serious ones, they came right down into range. And I lost around 15 kilos. And my hunger came under my complete control. I could skip meals at will for the first time in 20 years. and everything transformed. And then I knew I had the primary root cause, because when you get the primary cause, everything gets better, not just the thing you were trying to fix. The whole system responds. So I had it. And that started 7 or 8 years of deep diving on cholesterol and lecturing around the world.
I should not be saying this, but then I'm glad you had such high numbers, because now today the world is benefiting from it.
Thank you, Michelle. I agree.
Right. So you touched upon quite a few points here, but let's begin, Ivor, by understanding from you, how is insulin related to cardiovascular disease?
Right. Well, that's the biggie, Michelle. So insulin is a hormone which does myriad or many, many functions in the body. And the natural healthy state for a human is to occasionally trigger your insulin to be released from the pancreas with what you eat. So it should be pulsatile and spike up for a short period, a couple of times a day. And in general, insulin in the body should stay low. But what happens in the modern world, many things cause our insulin to rise and rise and rise until it's steadily high. And that's called hyperinsulinemia, or high insulin. And when you push your body to need to raise your insulin and keep it steadily high, then you develop insulin resistance, where your body is now trying to counteract or not respond to the high insulin and not overshoot. So you've got this double problem and a vicious circle of high insulin and resistance of your body's cells to insulin in the face of the high insulin. So that insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, that combination is the most common disease process in the modern world. And obviously India as well has huge amounts of diabetes. Yeah. So what I'm describing now essentially is type 2 diabetes. So you may not be diagnosed, but you could easily have, or most people have, high insulin and insulin resistance. And when you're in that state, the linings of your arteries become inflamed. All of your organ systems are negatively affected. Your fat tissue becomes inflamed. Your fat cells get larger and insulin resistant. You develop visceral fat. And to be honest, nearly every system in the body, including your brain, Alzheimer's being called type 3 diabetes, is also a disease of insulin resistance of the brain. So if people can just grasp, the biggest deal in today's world of disease is hyperinsulin and insulin resistance combination. And that's underpinning most modern chronic disease. It's not the only cause, but it's the biggest thing to address first by the engineering principle of hit the big factors first.
Right. So, Ivor, you mentioned that insulin is one of the biggest factors, and even in India, we are not very surprised. That's a test that nobody even talks about. They don't even want to know about it. We are constantly monitoring our glucose or doing our lipid panel tests and other things. So considering that insulin is related to cardiovascular disease and it's one of the biggest factors, then what about LDL? You say LDL and everybody's like, LDL. So what about LDL? And with that, if you could also cover that, what does a layman needs to understand or know when he is looking at his lipid test report?
Right. So LDL, the bad cholesterol. And of course, people will probably know we've got HDL, the good cholesterol.
The good cholesterol.
Yeah. So essentially, Michelle, to put it simply, you've got trillions of LDL particles in your blood, and they travel around. They're low density lipoprotein, and they carry triglycerides or fat molecules to give energy to your body, fat energy. And that's their main role, these LDL particles. They're part of a system that transports energy for healthy use. This is good. They also carry cholesterol as well. So these LDL particles have cholesterol and triglyceride. Now, to put it simply, it's not the LDL particle designed by evolution to keep us healthy. That's the problem. But if you damage that LDL particle and that transport system, then you can have issues. And the LDL particles do take part in atherosclerosis, the disease of your arteries that causes most heart attacks. But they are not really causal. The question more is, what have you done to damage your LDL cholesterol? What have you done to make your cholesterol transport system become dysfunctional? And that's the big question. And the best way to make your LDL system become bad is to become hyperinsulinemia or insulin resistant. Now, there's many other things: smoking, oxidative stress, bad foods that cause radical oxygen species in the body. There's myriad. Sugar is a great one that glycates and damages your LDL particles and causes them to be a real problem. But if people can just get in their heads, it's not the LDL per se, but it's the root causes that drive the LDL to be part of the problem. So to give a really simple example, LDL number in millimoles, your LDL number does not mean much on its own. And William Castelli, the director of Framingham, in 1996 published a paper. Now, Framingham was the biggest heart study on humans ever done. It's still running after 60 years. And that guy Castelli knew his stuff. And he said, unless your LDL is above 7.8, that's your LDL number, above 7.8, it has no predictive power on its own to discover future heart attack risk. So the important thing is the LDL number is not meaningless, but it's a very weak risk factor, because it really just, when it's high, might indicate you have another real problem, or you might not. So if you take a man 50 years old, heart attack risk in the risk algorithms, and you can put a link later to one of the risk algorithms. They use these algorithms all over the world to find out your heart attack risk in the next 10 years and decide whether you need lifelong medications. So the algorithms are a big deal. But if you put in a guy with an LDL of 5 and a total cholesterol of 8, which is huge, but you also put in that this guy has good high HDL, no hypertension or blood pressure, and you put the other numbers in that make him not insulin resistant, then he comes out as low risk. So the LDL number on its own is very poor for predicting anything. Now, the good numbers to use from your panel, I'll briefly describe them. You've got your LDL and HDL and total cholesterol and triglyceride. They're the 4 numbers. So if you divide the total divided by the HDL number, that ratio is very powerful. And Castelli, who I mentioned, said 25 years ago, it's much, much more powerful than LDL in all the studies. So that ratio of total over HDL should be around 4 or less, ideally. And that's a much better measure for people who do want to look at their cholesterol numbers and risk.
That's really great. So you mentioned about the ratios and about LDL and how it's not really bad because we need LDL, and it's the damaged LDL that's causing the issue. It's not the LDL per se. And out of the various reasons that we can point out, high insulin is something that really, really affects it. So, yeah.
Oh, well, I was just going to mention one quick thing. For sure, Michelle, that's a great summary. But there was a study done, EuroAspire, 2 years ago in Europe, and they looked across 24 countries of Europe and cardiac patients ages 18 to 80. So that covers all the cardiac picture of Europe. And they measured their glucose. And they found out that 76% approximately of cardiac patients of all ages in all countries of Europe were essentially type 2 diabetic, most undiagnosed, which is insulin resistance. And if they used insulin measurements, which they didn't, the remaining 24%, a lot of them were probably some degree of type 2 diabetic. So if people can see that when you look at all the heart disease victims across Europe, they're almost all type 2 diabetic. However, their LDL bad cholesterol won't be any different than healthy people. So that's just a good way of illustrating what I'm saying. The LDL is mostly a distraction, but sorry, go ahead, as you say.
No, right. So that's really a good example, like because one is how we are not looking at insulin. I mean, a normal person just doesn't look at insulin. Most of them have not even heard about it unless a doctor is prescribing them insulin because they cannot manage their diabetes. Until then, no, and I don't know even if at that stage anybody is even testing their insulin. Uh, you know, so that's there. And like you said, that the LDL markers weren't different between the healthy ones and the ones who had diabetic. I mean, who were diabetic. So they were like, that's a number that is like really has been used to distract us from the main cause. So you are a co-author of a book. How is low carb diet? And you said that once you got to the root cause of this, you adopted a low carbohydrate diet and it has benefited you. So can you tell our viewers how is a low carbohydrate diet beneficial to improve their lipid numbers?
Right. Well, the low carb diet is probably the primary intervention if you have a problem. So because most of the problems driving modern chronic disease are related to high insulin, high blood sugar, the first thing you do is remove all the digestible carbohydrates from your diet, the refined carbs, the sugars, and certainly the vegetable oils, but we'll get to that later. And when you remove all of those very easily digestible rices, breads, pastas, all this kind of junk food, refined carb, then your blood glucose will suddenly be able to drop for the first time in years. And after a while, slowly, your blood insulin will drop, your insulin resistance will drop. So if people want to view it simply, when you've got a sugar and insulin problem, a problem of excess sugar and insulin, the first thing to do is to remove sugar from your diet. But the thing is, we all think of sugar as Coca-Cola or cubes of sugar or table sugar. But no. Refined carbs like breads, pastas, cereals, they're all essentially just sugar. And even the whole grain breads that have got fiber, not really. The overwhelming majority of whole grain breads immediately flash into glucose in your mouth and rapidly into your bloodstream. So that's the essence of the low carb diet. If you have a problem, you remove all these foods and you can rapidly lower your insulin resistance. Your cholesterol ratios will get dramatically better, overwhelmingly. That's what mine did and people all over the world. Your HDL will tend to go back up as your insulin resistance drops. Your LDL may move anywhere, to be honest. It's very noisy. Your triglycerides will drop and your ratios will get better and your whole cholesterol transport system will take a sigh of relief when you pull out the sugar.
Right. Yeah, those are like the great benefits of low carb diet, something that is so easily manageable, but such a personal responsibility. I think it's kind of easier to go to a doctor and just take some pills because then it's not my responsibility. But then a diet and a lifestyle is completely a personal responsibility. Now, here a small point I want to, I wish you would like to cover. In few of your talks and interviews, you've spoken about, this is for the ones who are already on a low carb diet. You've spoken about cheat meals, pizza hangover, and those big sugar spikes that are not really good for even somebody who is on a consistent low carb diet. So a little bit for the ones who are already on a low carb diet and are doing some cheat meals here and there.
Yeah, cheat meals are tricky, Michelle, because, you know, when you stay to low carb, healthy diet with meat, fish, and eggs and above ground vegetables, and you stay the course, you're kind of removed from the addictive nature of sweet foods and sugary foods. But when you dip back in again, it can draw you back into that addiction. And it is for most people addictive by nature. So, I mean, I take dark chocolate, 85% cocoa, as a treat with heavy cream. And if I want to cheat a bit, I get the 70%, which is a little high in sugar, but at least it's not going crazy to 55% milk chocolate, 55% sugar. So you can push a little further occasionally. Um, but really, once you start cheating, if you can handle it, it's a bit like smoking. An ex-smoker, some can take an occasional cigarette and they can manage it, but a lot of people just end up back on a pack a day. So
Right.
it's kind of tricky. In restaurants, when I'm out eating in a real restaurant and they've got these artisan breads, I eat the bread, but I try to never eat the bread at home because then it will become a habit. But when you're out enjoying yourself, you can maybe have a dessert or some of those crusty breads because it's kind of a special occasion or at a party
Right.
or a birthday.
Right.
But I find if you get in that, the best snacks really are the French sausage, saucisson, the hard meat and fat. You know, it's quite delicious. Olives, you know, maybe some cubes of cheese. There are a lot of snacks you can have that are still not carby, but are a great thing to fill a gap if you do feel hungry during the day. So, and I
Oh,
believe. Actually,
yeah.
Michelle, you guys are bringing out now D Life a course in low carb. So I'm guessing you'll probably be covering these kind of questions too.
Yeah, so we are just trying to do our bit in India, trying to create awareness. And since even now in India, keto is as a Western fad diet, and it's not for Indians. And you know how our statistics around diabetes and cardiovascular diseases in India. We are a very high carb eaters. Uh, so we as D Life, we are a platform of by and for Indians. And in the last, since 2014, we are running the platform where we are helping people through low carb and keto diet to manage their metabolic diseases. So it's a way to create awareness. It's a way to bring out the right information. And so hence we are launching in March the diploma and certificate course around low carb nutrition. And the good part about the course is that it's a certified course, so it's legal and you can practice as a nutritionist in India. So you will be a licensed nutritionist once you do that course. So yeah, thanks Ivo for mentioning. Yes, we are trying to do our little bit in India towards helping out people with this.
Yeah, well, no, in fairness, congratulations are due because I know there's a huge amount of work involved in that, and especially to get official accreditations. There's a lot of hurdles to go over.
Right.
But yeah, and D Life now has hundreds of case histories of success stories, and it's becoming a pretty big engine in India from outside looking in to me.
Yeah, we have more than 200 plus success stories. We have a lot of Indian recipes because, as you know, towards the end, we are all talking about a diet. And for, like I said, for Indian people, it is still a Western diet. And for them, it's like all bacon, beefsteaks, and eggs. And as you know, a majority of population in India is vegetarian, and vegetarian due to religious factors. And we have some very typical eating habits that we don't want to move away from. So we have like I think more than 1,200 Indian vegetarian recipes, which are uploaded and created by the members itself. And that is really the core point that that is attracting so many people, because they're like, okay, they can modify this diet as per their lifestyle, as per their eating habits, as per their culture, and things like that. Yeah. So I will, yeah, you want to say something?
I was just wondering, Michelle, we might touch on the coronary calcium scan, because interestingly, there was an article put out, I forget the name of the magazine, Open Magazine, maybe?
Open Magazine, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
a huge article the other day. And basically, I was interviewed, and Dr. Aseem Malhotra, the cardiologist from the UK, who's a crusader in this space.
Right.
And I think as well, some of your guys were in it, and it
Yes.
was a great article.
Yes, it was. So that was my next question. You are really doing a big job by advocating the CAC score. So tell our viewers, what is it about? And especially, we want to highlight on this because in India, it is really easy to go and get this done. It's not very expensive. It's just $75 to $100 maybe. And you can actually walk into a city scans place and just say, okay, I want to get this test done for my personal understanding. And it's not that difficult. So considering the fact that it's not that difficult, please share with us how important it is for people to know about it.
Yeah, well, exactly. I work on behalf of Irish Heart Disease Awareness, ihda.ie. And if anyone wants to get all the information, it's all there on the homepage, short videos, but I'll explain it briefly. So essentially in engineering, we say if you don't measure it, it don't get fixed, or if you don't measure it, you can't understand it. And the calcium scan, very simply in 5 minutes, it sees any calcium that's in your coronary arteries, in your main arteries. And when you develop this disease of atherosclerosis that causes the heart attacks, your body at a certain point begins to bring in calcium to strengthen or try and heal the inflamed areas of your arteries. So over time, the calcium, the amount of calcium, is a direct indicator of all the soft plaque and inflammation and atherosclerosis that you've got. So essentially, a zero scoring person at middle age, well, a high scoring person will be around 20 times more likely to have a heart attack in the coming 10 years. So it's a massive indicator of your real risk and your real level of disease. And we're finding people now all the time, men in their 40s, their bloods appear okay, their cholesterol's low, doctor thinks they're fine. They go in and get a scan, they get a score of 550, and suddenly they're a mega high risk patient who needs to do low carb and a lot more and get medical treatment. We have some people who walk in and get a huge score, like a 40-year-old the other day, a friend of mine told me about, went in, had a 3,000 score, immediately got a 6-way bypass, which saved his life. So unless you do this quick scan, you really don't know what's going on inside. Your blood test might look okay. It's impossible to know without looking. So that's the CAC score from the coronary scan. And what we want to do is get the message out that anyone ideally can go and find out their score. And the key thing is then, if you fix the root causes like we've been talking about, for many people, and we know now, you can stop the score increasing. And studies show that if you take a score and over a couple of years you stop it increasing much, you keep it to lower than 15% increase per year. So say you get a 500 and then the next year you get it to 540 and then 580, you slowed the progression. And the risk for those people who slow the progression, who take action, their risk plummets back down to someone who had a low score in the first place. So that's another key point, that you only know when you look. You need the calcium scan for that. And when you do have a high score, you can take action. Low carb, magnesium, potassium, fish oils, better exercise, medical treatment as necessary, but you take action and deal with your score, and then you live and don't get a premature heart attack because you fixed the fundamental issue. Yeah.
Right. So like I said, it's a great thing that you're creating this awareness, and I would again like to mention to our viewers that how easy it is to get it done in India, and probably we should really take advantage of the fact that it's not that expensive and it is easy, and it's something that everyone would like to know on their own. Uh, okay, having said that, there are some talk saying that a CAC score is equal to 40 X-rays, the radiation part. Is that really true? And what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, people fear radiation, and that's very fair. We had Fukushima and all the other incidents, but people have to know the numbers. And I must say, Indian people are great for mathematics and numbers. So here we go. So the scan is around the same as a bilateral mammogram. It's now less than 1 millisievert. So that's the unit. So less than 1 millisievert of radiation. So it is a lot more than an X-ray. But what we need to look at is, well, what does 1 millisievert mean? So there is no evidence over the last century of an exposure less than 100 millisieverts having any long-term impact. And the 1 millisievert from the scan, if you put that in the radiation risk calculator from the Radiological Institute, it has a theoretical 1 in 20,000 increased risk over the rest of life of some problem. So it's so small an increase in risk from the data that, and it's theoretical, most radiologists would agree it's actually not even real because it's so low. It's just a theoretical number extrapolated. So it's just irrelevant on the scheme of things because 1 in 20,000 versus finding out you have a high score and you have a 1 in 2 chance of a fatal heart attack, there's no comparison. So I know one person who's an engineer who reduced his score and fixed his heart disease. And he told me, I actually got 28 scans over 12 years. Now, that's excessive. 28 scans is crazy. But I mean, a scan and another one in 5 or 6 years, basically the tiny damage from 1 millisievert, your immune system just mops up those cells that are damaged. But if you take 200 millisieverts, like a real exposure, your immune system can't handle that much. So 1 millisievert, it's a joke, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. And if your CAC score is high, then I think it's worth the risk that you have taken, whatever little bit damage it is going to cause. I think I think it's just worth knowing it.
Absolutely, Michelle. And I'll tell you another thing. People, if they want the answer in CAC without doing all the research, I'll give you the answer. All American presidents and all American astronauts must have the scan before taking office or going into space. So there's your answer. They know it's the best scan. They just don't really want it for little people, or they don't seem to approve of it. But it's the way to find out. Cut through all the crap and find out what disease you have and what you need to do about it. And we can link, maybe when you release this, I have 4 interviews with 4 excellent cardiologists. And all 4 hour-long interviews discuss progression and how you stop progression. So if you get a high score, it can be worrying. But the reality is you need to hear all these cardiologists going through all the measures you take, low carb and more, right, to deal with the high score and to bring yourself right back down to low risk and not have that premature heart attack.
Right, I know. And there was a tweet that you shared a few days back, I think yesterday, about somebody who was not diagnosed, and that person died on Christmas Eve, and yeah, so
there are tragedies, hundreds of thousands every day. So it's the world's biggest killer. Cancer is catching up, but it's caused by similar problems. But the constant tragedies all the time. We have huge lists of them because people have no awareness. And a really important thing to understand, particularly for people in India, is TOFI, or thin outside, fat inside. So this is a huge problem. My sponsor, David Bobbitt, was classic TOFI. He was slim, running 4 times a week, on a high carb diet, but he looked healthy. Cholesterol was fine, blood pressure, everything fine. And he got a calcium scan randomly and it had a score of 900. So he had the arteries of an 86-year-old. So the point is that TOFI people are really the biggest tragedy. They don't appear fat, they're slim, but they've got visceral fat hidden inside. So they really think they're okay. 49 years old, 3 children, not overweight, not fat, cholesterol looks good, doctor thinks they're grand, they run through 2 times a week, and then they drop dead of a heart attack. And in the autopsy, they find a ton of calcification and visceral fat. So people need to know it's not just the overweight smoking people who get the heart attacks. A massive amount of heart attacks are people who appear slim. And the genetics that makes you not get so fat but develop a tummy and visceral fat is quite strong in India.
Yes,
so Indian people generally.
Yeah. Our personal fat threshold is like very less. So, we are not going to like put pounds of weight and like be extremely obese, but we all have a belly and we have lots of visceral fat, and we just think it's okay. So there's a concept of glycocalyx that you have been mentioning, and if you can share a little bit on that for our viewers.
Okie doke. So yeah, the glycocalyx is very interesting. I only got into it around a year ago, really. But basically, the lining of your arteries all have this kind of hair-like layer called the glycocalyx, and they're strands of proteoglycans, basically sugar-type molecules. And these are like hairs all over the inside of all your arteries, and they're crucially important. And they wave in your blood flow, and they're actually mechanosensors, and they send signals based on the blood flow and the shear, signals to your inner artery to release nitric oxide, to dilate your arteries and open them. So they're actually mechanical sensors, billions of them all over the inside of your pipes. And they also can become damaged. They have a role as a sieving function to keep blood components like LDL and all the other inflammatory parts of your blood, to keep those away from the inner wall of the artery, the endothelium and the endothelial cells. So they're a protective layer and they're a non-stick layer. And they're just amazing evolution that this layer exists everywhere in the insides of your arteries. But what we know damages the glycocalyx and begins the process of atherosclerosis. We know what the factors are from countless human studies and in vitro studies that I've gathered. Smoking, high spikes in sugar, high spikes in insulin, high TNF alpha, an inflammatory marker, immune conditions and autoimmune, So my top list of drivers for atherosclerosis is also the same list, essentially, that damages the glycocalyx, which is unsurprising. So to look after your glycocalyx, healthy low-carb diet, no blood sugar spikes, low insulin, lower your inflammatory markers, keep your cholesterol healthy. Damaged LDL damages the glycocalyx and the endothelium. And essentially look after your glycocalyx. And now we know how to do it.
Right. Like I said, it's our personal responsibility, and it's great that you have touched upon so many subjects here. And for all our viewers, thank you for watching this episode, and the link to Ivor's Twitter handle, where he's extremely active, and his YouTube channel, where there are a lot of videos which are data driven, and all of the topics that you need to understand further. We will be sharing a link in the description there. Do like and share our videos, subscribe to our channel, and give us your feedback. So towards the end, Ivor, what is your message to our viewers in India? Is there anything you would like to highlight?
Right. Well, I'd probably point out for the calcium scan, ihda.ie. That's a great place to go and look. And we don't have Indian centers yet, but we're going to get the whole world. At the moment, it's just America and UK and Ireland and that. And the other thing is, yeah, low carb is coming into a golden age. And just a final word, it's not that all carbs are automatically bad and drive disease. Our traditional vegetable carbs that had slow absorption, real foods, they were actually okay. And we had populations that could eat high carb, but non-processed, unprocessed. The problem carbs are the refined carbs and the sugars. But the problem now is that once you've become diseased and you have metabolic disease and diabetes, now you are a person who even has to be careful with the carbs that are not so bad. So I think low carb, when you have most of your population with some degree of diabetes in India, all around the world, you now have a population that the most at risk with the most disease need to lower their carb just to manage their machine. So low carb is absolutely the way to go. And I think your group is going to grow and grow because this is the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Ivor. Thank you so much. We are so happy that towards the beginning of the year, you have touched upon such a sensitive topic, a subject that everyone is so aware of, but not aware of. So, so thank you so much, Ivor. Thank you, all our viewers, and thank you for coming to D Life podcast. And we'll be in touch. Hopefully, we will have more podcasts with you and cover more topics in detail.
Great stuff, Michelle. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Ivor.